Charlie Crockett here on WOJB with I'm Just a Clown. Sometimes I feel like just a clown, but hey, joining me in the studio is Don Posh with IndiGO, your allies for independence is what they say. How you doing this morning, sir?
Well, I'm doing great. Good morning.
Good morning. It's wonderful to have the sunshine and not the I mean, we still have rain here and there, but that's to be expected. But man, there was a couple of weeks where we just had clouds, and it was kind of depressing, you
Yeah, it's
know?
not good for you. Not good
No.
for the head.
And we just had a lot of people that were talking about what are we talking about today? What was it? Remind me.
Oh, we're
Being
we're going to
alone,
talk about
loneliness.
Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yeah.
So I thought a good thing to bring in, and it's the end of COVID. I was listening this morning that they officially ended the COVID
Yeah.
emergency,
Yep.
but that brings us back to isolation.
Yep.
And we all got this opportunity to experience isolation deeply
Oh
during
yeah.
COVID.
Right. Working
And
everybody working from home, keeping away from other people, just keeping your 6 foot was supposed to be the distance, and
yeah,
nobody going out anywhere, and yeah, it was pretty intense.
and think about how that affected you. I kind of do a little self-analyzation of, it brought on some anxiety and depression. It seemed like,
Yeah,
for myself, I could get through my day of work and get through making dinner, and then I was done. Like, usually I used to do things after dinner,
sure.
at
Yep.
night, and it
Hmm.
just seemed like I had nothing. I'd put the TV on and just nothing, because you weren't going to concerts, you weren't going to do things outside, you
Yeah.
trying to avoid all that stuff. So it kind of, and now that it's over, you could reflect back and say, wow, that's how I was feeling, and how paralyzing depression is.
Hmm.
And one of the things with Indigo, we consider mental health that it's part of the ADA.
Sure.
It can be paralyzing for people, depending on what the situation is. And when you look at what we experienced there, it should help to give us a little more empathy for those that remain isolated.
Right.
There were people isolated before COVID and are still isolated. And that
Hmm.
turns into, so you think of that constant anxiety, depression, and part of it, one of the things that brings on isolation that's prevalent when you live in rural areas is financial isolation. It's not talked about.
Yeah.
People are living, from what I've heard on some reports, you got 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck.
Hmm.
Well, what about the ones that aren't even in that category, the ones below the paycheck to paycheck?
Yeah.
So it affects your self-esteem. You don't want to feel like a mooch. Just think
Yeah.
what it's like when somebody says, well, let's go out. You want to go out for a meal. Let's go out to lunch, and you can't pay your way. And they'll
Hmm.
gladly pay for you because they know you're in that situation, but your
Right.
pride
Yeah.
says, no, no, thank you. I think maybe we could do that some other time.
Hmm.
And you're always saying no, and you get stuck inside and with your own thoughts in your head. And then every time that situation occurs, you feel that
Yeah.
depression getting even deeper. So these are the kind of things that lead to alcoholism and drug addictions and things, because you want to escape that pain.
Right.
Or if you have that financial isolation, why do people do meth? Well, because it gives me something to do, because now I'm the dealer. Now I'm somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, all my hopes and dreams have already been
Yeah.
crushed, but now people want me because I'm the guy that's got the stuff.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect, and a lot of people were doing meth because they could work two jobs.
Hmm.
I'll just do a
Kept
little
them
bit.
going. Yeah.
I'll do a little bit. I could work 2 jobs. I could make enough to live now. It's not just to exist, it's
Yeah.
to thrive.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are isolated that way. Then you got physical isolation, people that with disabilities, the inability to get around. Maybe you need special transportation because you're a wheelchair user,
Yep.
or just trying to keep a
Cane
vehicle on the road.
have a cane or a walker and you can't drive, it's having that money. Now you have to use public transportation and pay for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's another one. And then we find that our elderly, once somebody loses their partner, sometimes even in my own case, and my mom did pass before my father, but she didn't drive. So if it would have been the other way, it would have been a huge difference.
Yeah.
Or even you get to the point in life where you shouldn't be driving anymore. Or um, in one instance, there was somebody I was working with that had plenty of retirement money, lived in a really, really nice place, had a really nice car in the garage, but had macular degeneration.
Mm,
So I
yeah.
have the means to get out, but my body says, no, I can't get out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that is to be said to isolation. And hopefully, if you have that empathy and you know somebody that's isolated, you could extend a hand or just a kind
Yeah.
gesture, or even conversation. It doesn't have to be let's go out to eat. It just sit on the porch and
Have a
talk a little
have a
bit.
cup of coffee and
Yeah,
talk about what's happening out, and especially with the weather now, we can get out and get those people with mobility issues because again, they're isolated. I know in my own family, my father-in-law had some driving issues and we said no more. And that's one area of mobility that he does not have control over now,
right.
and he's more isolated at home. Now, he may seem happy to be in his little apartment downstairs and watching TV all day or whatever, but now summer's here, which is great because he can get outside at least and get out, get that. You don't feel as isolated when you can get outside.
Right.
You have birds to look at, you have flowers to deal with, and other things that are going on. And so that helps. But still, mobility, and even in my own life, I experienced some disabilities and in inabilities for mobility. A lot
Yeah.
of ITs in there, yeah,
Well, I was
mobilities.
I was worried about you,
Yeah,
when that came on. I mean, it's like, wow, he's not getting around, and I mean, we
yeah,
talked a lot about it when we met on occasion, and
yeah,
it's like, hey, that and the
yeah,
fear, it's like it brings in a lot. Well, I do this for a living, it's kind of like people that we have a lot of people that do physical labor here,
yeah,
and you're cranking along and all of a sudden you hit that point in life, maybe you're in your 40s, maybe you're in your 50s, maybe you're in your 60s, where all of a sudden the body will not let you do the job that you are so well versed at doing.
yeah,
Do you have plan B? Most of the time you don't. Who prepares when they're 20 years old to say, well, I'm a carpenter, I build things,
right,
this is what I do. Well, if you don't become the contractor and you're still the guy lifting and carrying and
yeah,
doing all that work, there's a point where your body says, no,
yeah,
you can't do it. Or you could still do it, but you can't do it at the speed you did it
yeah,
previously to earn the
yep,
kind of money you need to
right,
survive.
yeah. Yeah, I've realized in my own life, now that I am still mobile, summer comes along and it demonstrates to me with my summer activities, one, either how out of shape I am because of the 2 or 3 years I've had of disabilities. And now it's like, okay, I became weaker during those times, and now it's time to work on getting strength. Um, I actually have a stroke survivor as a guest tomorrow. and she'll be talking about how she had this stroke and she's not letting it stop her with her disabilities. She was a lumberjill who did log rolling
Wow.
and still does it, and just talking about her story about surviving a stroke, which can be very debilitating and isolating for someone because either they can't communicate because the stroke has affected their lips or their jaw, that
Mhm.
all that whole area, so they can't communicate very well. So that's an isolating thing, or they talk really, really slow. And in our fast-paced conversation world, we want to have people talk fast, and to sit and listen to someone struggling through a speech impediment or that type of they're trying to put the words like I am right now, trying to put words into my mouth from my head. It doesn't quite work. So that can be isolating as well.
And one thing that you mentioned was the physical aspect of the stroke. And then,
Yeah.
um, like, I was impressed this morning because you said you rode your bike in.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of also talk about how important exercise is for your mental health
Mm-hmm.
because it's all connected. When you're bringing your heart rate up, you're pumping blood to your brain. That is something that I learned in the dementia coalitions that I'm on,
Okay.
that it is extremely important to your brain to get the blood there. So when we become sedentary, that works all against our existence going the way we'd like to.
Yeah.
We look at retirement, you and I are getting close to that age, and we
Well,
think
unless
of,
they change it and then they put it later.
again,
Yeah.
yeah, just work till you're dead. Just that's the deal. Yeah,
uh,
let's just keep working. We got to
well,
get money out of you.
if I when you've I've talked to many retirees and they're actually more busy now than they were before they were retired. So that's good that they can be that way. But yeah, that sedentary lifestyle, I mean, gravity works against your blood and
Absolutely.
it puts it down in your legs and your feet where you don't want it, and you want it in your head. So you got to get that heart pumping and get it moving.
Yeah, and well, it's like my rehab is I do my exercising in the morning, which I never did when I was a physical laborer.
Sure.
And if I didn't do that, I would not have the job I have today. I had difficulty getting around. There were times just holding on to a cup of coffee, it was heavy, or I dropped them. I had some severe tendonitis and some spinal neck injuries that really weren't letting up, and all they did was drug me. And the
Yeah.
drugs just make you stupid and leave you with the pain in its wake,
Yeah.
and I wanted off of it. And
Mm.
this is really interesting too with the opioid epidemic. They were giving these things to kids that were with sports injuries, and I was on that fentanyl patch, which is
Mm.
about as heavy as you could get for pain relief,
Wow.
and it made me so dumb, feeling like I couldn't even tell if I was hungry.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad if you
Wow.
don't know if you're hungry. And the pain was still as intense as if I didn't take it. So I thought you could just get off of it. And what happened was the doctor said, "Oh no, you can't do that.
Mm.
You lower the dose
Right.
each month."
Yeah.
And when I lowered every time, the first time I thought I had the flu. I didn't realize what it was.
Oh.
The second month, I realized I was going through DTs.
Mm.
So, like, you'd get the creepy crawlies like they show on the TV shows with a heroin addict,
Sure.
where you are, and I was actually doing that with my arms and my legs were just, you can't sit still.
Yeah.
And when you're cold and you bring the covers up, as soon as you bring the covers up, you're too hot.
Yeah.
And that happened like four times. And it was 3 days in a row, and you wouldn't sleep for 3 days.
Mm.
That was prescribed to me.
Wow.
So it's pretty
Yeah.
heavy stuff that some people are taking. So how could you not get addicted if that's the consequence of not taking it.
Yeah.
I just I didn't want it that bad that I just kinda said, "Well, I'll just suffer through it," and at the time, because of my physical condition, I wasn't working anyway. So I was
Yeah.
just so I had the opportunity to just ride it out. But
Mm.
pain is another thing that makes people isolated. And
Yeah.
it changes, and that's part of the mental health too. If you've got constant nagging pain and you just try to live with it, you kinda get a little ornery after a while,
Mhm.
you know? It
It
changes.
it gets old to be in pain all the time.
Yeah.
It really wears on you. We're talking with, Don Posh, independent living specialist with IndiGO, and we're talking about, isolation and mental health, and give us some solutions now. We know what the problem is. What's some solutions that you can offer to our
S
listeners?
For isolation?
Or just mental health as they're trying to recover, as we're all trying to recover from COVID. And I even had some school counselors in here, and we were talking about the students where they were in isolation in one particular school year of their life. They were all working from home in their bedrooms on their devices, and now they're all coming back to this, larger collective of other people and distractions, and they're not used to that. And they're still on their devices and they want to be alone because they liked being alone. But mental health wise, it wasn't healthy for our students. So now we're trying to get them to reacclimate to our society and be part of the community and get them out of the house, get them out of their bedrooms. And that's been a real hard thing for our youth. And they're seeing that in the schools.
One thing that I have heard, statewide are some, discussions about having peer support in the schools,
Yeah,
and peer support works a lot better than, having somebody that has a college degree and reading about it in a book, because a peer support specialist is somebody that has experienced it,
yes,
overcome it,
yep,
and just it's like AA. It's like, does the alcoholic want to hear from some college student or college grad saying, "Well, this is how you should deal with it"? They want to hear from somebody else that lived it.
right.
That lived
Been
experience
there, done
is
that. Yep.
well, it's huge though.
Yeah.
I could imagine how you would reject your doctor telling you what you should do compared to your AA counselor that has lived it and maybe slipped a couple of times and
Right.
understands slipping back
Yep.
and forward.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that it seems like the state is moving more towards the peer support model, and I think that could be really helpful because they're looking at it for suicide prevention as well,
Sure.
and people that have thought or attempted it
Yeah.
also can help somebody,
Right.
and it offers an opportunity for somebody that's gone through that to use that experience to earn a living and help other people.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and basically that's kind of what independent living is based on. Our organization is required to have 51% of our staff and volunteer or staff and board of directors to be persons with disabilities. And I believe at Indigo, we're
Wow.
over 80. We're somewhere between 80 and 90, probably closer to 90%.
Sure.
That gives an idea what it's like to have a disability. And when you meet with somebody, you have that empathy that somebody that read it from a book doesn't really
Right.
possess because you haven't
Mm-hmm.
been there. And I
Yep.
think with the kids, it's gonna be tough for them. One of the things that we have that gotten information on is they call them ACEs, and they're called adverse childhood experiences that lead to negative effects later in life that affect
Mm.
your health, your
Right.
ability to thrive, and so forth. And I think COVID was definitely an adverse childhood
Oh,
experience
sure. Yeah.
because we didn't have that. We did have to, duck under our desks when there was
Right.
the air raid
Yep.
drills that we had back then because they
I
would.
remember those.
Yeah, yeah, they might be dropping a
And
nuclear bomb, so,
yeah, get under your desk.
yeah, get it,
That's really gonna help you.
that'll help you a lot.
But, yeah, I know just watching and again, when we went through COVID, the students went through that traumatic event, but also their parents and their family members. We were all in this together for the first time. I don't know if there were older people who remember previous pandemics that really just shut down the country. It shut down the world. And that
The
was
only one would be that
significant.
1918 flu pandemic, and nobody
Yeah.
was around from that.
No.
And some of the responses during that were the same. If you
Hmm.
looked at
Oh,
the
okay.
history of it, that there were people saying, no, they had this one, and I can't remember what city it was, but they had an annual parade, and we're going to have our parade, and a lot of people got sick and died.
Wow.
And it was similar. There was a big chunk of the world's population. Actually, it was worse because they didn't have the technology to get things out. You're looking
Right.
at 1918,
Yeah.
and you're just getting cars going at that time,
Right.
so apparently from some studies I've seen is they thought maybe about a fifth of the world's population had
Mm,
passed just because of that. And I remember there were some uh, grave sites that I've run across in these weird remote places where there would just be 5 stones. The whole family just died.
sure.
There's
Yeah.
no words on. There
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
no name on them or anything. But uh, and then you can see others from that era,
Yeah.
and it was like all at the same time. So
Yeah.
the whole family just was wiped right off the map. And unfortunately, due to politics, we didn't come together to fight this. We had to divide.
Hmm.
And that, I think, made it so much worse because you're getting conflicting information. We have all this technology to do that. One person's saying, do what you want. The other one's saying, hey, be careful. Don't spread it around.
Right.
Who's right?
Yeah.
Who's wrong? And well, we lost nearly 1 million people, or somewhere around 1 million in the
Hmm.
United States alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Just here in the US.
Yeah.
So, in the limited time we have left, we have about 5 minutes before Democracy Now. Let's talk about what people can do to help better their isolation situation and better their mental health. What can we be doing now that it's summer? I'm assuming the biggest thing is to get outside if you can, open a window at least. If you're homebound. But how can we, you know, do better with our mental health?
I think one thing I learned was during COVID, sometimes you're always on the computer because I was
Yeah,
home doing the home thing, but I had a window, and I started to appreciate some things that I hadn't noticed previously. A squirrel is something you see whether you live in the city or the country.
yeah.
But in the spring, they start getting active and chasing each
Each
other
other, yep.
around,
Mhm.
looking for the girl,
Yeah, a little
and
frisky.
I found that they're just as amazing as watching the monkeys on a PBS show. Why is it? Because they're here. So
Yeah,
we don't
right.
pay attention. So maybe a little bit of looking at what you're surrounded with and taking advantage that we live in this beautiful place, and sometimes just in your own yard there, even if you live in town, there's butterflies, there's bees, there's critters doing critter things, and maybe look at that natural world for a place to find some solace.
Sure. Yeah,
I don't know if I have any other. I mean, that's what worked for me. Um, if you could walk down and sit by the river and just, like Bob Dylan, just sit back and watch the river flow,
yeah,
the dock of the bay, just music,
yeah, music is
music. Turn
huge.
off the TV.
Yeah,
Find some music that you maybe know the words to, or that just makes you want to move a little bit and shake your hips or,
Right.
get into
Tap
it.
your toes
Yeah,
and
yeah. If your toes tap and,
yeah,
depending on what your disability is, one thing is to try to get over the stigma of mental health. And if you have the ability, if you're on Medicaid and you could get some mental health therapy, to go see somebody
yeah.
because there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
And
talk therapy is huge. It's a great opportunity just to express yourself and be heard by somebody. That's all we want is some validation that we've been heard by somebody with our issues that we're dealing with. And I know when I've been to a therapist, they really don't say a whole lot. They just sit back and listen to what you're going through and just getting it out there, sharing your story. I know a lot of people who are dealing with drug abuse and alcoholism who are now clean. Just to talk about their story helps keep them clean
right, right.
because they're constantly, and people think, well, don't talk about the negative. Well, you still got to remember what you went through to appreciate where you are today
Absolutely.
and the recovery where you're at now and walking that red road and then going to these meetings where you're talking with other people to say, I've been there, I've done that, take my advice and maybe this will work for you to in your recovery. So having that social interaction, and again, talk therapy with a therapist is a social interaction.
And the thing
And
that's really good about the therapist aspect is that you're not sharing it with a friend or a family member. You're talking with somebody that's objective.
yeah,
So this might be something you don't want to share with your friend or family
right.
member.
Yeah.
And when you get to talk to somebody about it and let it go, that's when you start to win and come out of it.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's confidential with a therapist, so it's not going to
Yeah,
go anywhere else. Family members, again, depending on the family member, they may want to talk about it or put it on Facebook. At worst, get it out there. But yeah, it's a very important issue, and there's several people that I know. There's a pastor who just recently resigned because he's concerned about his mental health, and he's very public about it. And I may actually have him on as a guest to talk about mental health, continuing to talk about this mental health issue, not just in the Hayward or the WOJB listening area. This is happening around the country and most likely around the world with other people who've experienced this COVID effect.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think attacking the stigma is where we have to go to get more people to allow themselves to seek the help that they need,
yeah,
because the stigma is the thing that prevents people from moving on.
yeah. Well, boy, lots of discussion, Don. Thank you for coming in. Don Posh is the independent living specialist for Burnett, Washburn, Sawyer, and Price counties with IndiGO, and he can be reached at 715-919-4932 if you have any questions about some of the disabilities you're living with and you want some independence from those. So, thank you, Don, for coming in. We appreciate it.
It's a wrap.
Yes, it is.
All
So
right. Thank you, Mark. You
here's
have a great
Democracy
day.
Now!
From New York, this is Democracy.